All right, we're bringing one of our all-time most requested guests back, David Whitehead, and he has released a new podcast series on his Rufkin channel. So we'll have the links down there. Please go and support David. Today we're going to be tying it in with what we've talked about earlier: UFOs, Mars, outer space, and ancient Atlantis. This reminds me of like an episode of Coast to Coast.
How's it going, Sean? Good to be back. Good to see you. Thanks
Oh,
for having me on.
huge thanks for coming back, man. And before we start, then, what have you been up to since I last spoke to you? If you can keep it within safe
10
terminology for
seconds.
YouTube.
Oh, safe. We'll keep it safe.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, because I've been officially banned from all of the socialist media platforms. So I'm now on all of the rogue rebel alliance platforms where they don't censor free speech. But anyways, yeah, I've been up to a lot. I've been working really hard on a documentary series called Cult of the Medics, which is basically a deep dive into the occult history of the medical industrial complex, unlike
Wow.
has ever been told before, in my opinion. And so I've been working on that. It's a free series. People can check out the first 7 chapters right now for free over at cultofthemedics.com. Let me know what you think. It's sort of an open source. I want everybody else to weigh in, and I'm just trying to roll out all the notes that I've collected on this type of subject matter in that series and get people's feedback. And then the other thing we just started, just because I was so sick and tired of talking about the that which shall not be named on my show, I said, well, let's start talking about some Mars and some moon and some weird anomalies and ancient history and pull out all the subjects that I grew up loving and researching and go on the quest to answer some of the mysteries of our world and the mysteries of our time. And that's what this new podcast series that we're calling the Mars Chronicles is all about. I've teamed up with my good friend Josh Reed over at the Red Pill Project. He's definitely a guy you should bring on. The guy's got a wealth of knowledge on these subjects. And so we said, hey, it just sort of happened organically in one of the shows we were doing on ancient serpent cults. And all of a sudden, he just starts pulling out some Mars stuff. And I went, oh my God, the Mars, let's talk about Mars. So we turned it into a whole podcast series. And we're doing that every Saturday night for, as long as we have to get it all out.
Great to hear you're focusing on content that's not going to cause algorithmic strangulation. Speaking of which, we had many requests for David's original interview on the channel that had to be removed to get reposted. We have reposted that to my Facebook wall. It's pinned right now on my Facebook wall. Links in the description box. And people are sharing it like crazy. The comments are coming in quick and fast, and people can see what David is about. So if you want to see the unmentionables, check that first interview out that we did, or go over to David's other platforms where he's not getting censored. All right, so the first question then is, was there an advanced civilization that once existed on Mars? What evidence do we have of that, David?
Well, it's a question that we're just pursuing. I don't have any smoking guns, but we've got some signals. We got some smoke, and usually where there's smoke, there's fire of some kind. And I know this type of subject is really, really, everybody's got their opinion on it. But I find that interesting as well, that it's not really settled, is it? So there is a mystery to be looked into. And that's all I'm trying to do with people is say, guys, you're being told that all the questions of the universe have already been answered by NASA and science. And so you don't have to go look into any mysteries. You don't need to pull out any of those old myths and legends. That's all just in the dustbin. We don't need that anymore. Don't worry about anomalous photographs of pyramidical shapes all over the moon and Mars. And don't worry about that kind of stuff because all the questions have been answered. All the mysteries have been solved. Don't you dare start thinking for yourself. Actually, contrary to that, what we're trying to do is activate people's curiosity and say, hey, let's go dig up some of the Richard Hoagland stuff. Let's go and take a different look at it. Let's look at some of the modern discoveries. Let's take a deep forensic analysis of this allegedly public scientific organization known as NASA, which is actually essentially an extension of the Department of Defense and a bunch of private aerospace companies like JPL, et cetera. And there is a classified element to NASA. And so I'm curious, what is it that they're worried about telling us? Why would they be hiding some of this footage? Why does some of the footage look like it was staged on a movie set? Why are we looking at these types of anomalies like faces on Mars or pyramids on Mars or even just if any one of those photographs that came back from these orbiter missions of Cydonia or these other places, if any single one of them turns out to be something anomalous or artificial, there goes the entire package of what would you call it? The whole narrative of what we've been told about our cosmos, about our history. And so that's a question that we're looking at, and we're going into all this information. I know it's hard to determine always, are these some of these photos CGI? Are they altered? Are we just like, is it tricks of light and shadow? We're going to go through all of that. But then also, Sean, to go into the ancient myths and legends of the world and see why there's so much discussion about ancient cataclysm of various kind on this planet, no matter where in the world you look. Were these all just campfire stories where they were just making stuff up? Or were they really witnessing pole shift like events where, writings of things like, seeing whole mountains formed in front of their eyes, or meteors or cometary strikes or floods or these types of things? It's interesting when you put it all together, just how much information there is about this. And so our question is, well, interesting how when you look at some of the photos on Cydonia, the Cydonia region on Mars, if some of them were artificial, okay, some of them might be mountains that look like they're something else, but some of them have geometry and mathematics built. Like when you look at it, it's precise right down to the degree of the angles. And some of them are three-sided pyramidal shapes, four-sided pyramidal shapes. Are they mountains or are they ruins, like the ruins littered all over this planet, these cyclopean ruins of structures that, Sean, we still haven't been able to reproduce a lot of these to this day. I mean, go show me where they've reconstructed a pyramid of Giza perfectly in the world, and I'll concede. But so you go, well, if there's all these ancient megaliths on Earth, and we're seeing similar types of structures allegedly on some of these photographs of the moon and Mars, we've even had people going back to the 1800s going and looking at telescopes and seeing what look to be artificial lines that are too symmetrical and perfect to just be something that's random. Well, maybe are we talking about how humans, did they only evolve on this planet, or were there civilizations and life on planets like Mars and Venus, possibly even the moon? Did they build Nazi bases on the moon? I mean, who knows, right? Like, we're just looking into this. And I think that there's enough smoke to show people that there is a fire of some kind. And then we're going to let the people viewing the information over these podcasts to decide for themselves, unlike the media where they're like, no, you must only accept this one narrative. We're not going to do that to you guys. Okay.
All right, so I'm going to tie in something you said at the beginning with something you said at the end, though, Dan. You talked about the origins of NASA, and you mentioned the Nazis. What about the Nazi origins of NASA? Did the CIA incorporate a lot of Nazis post World War II, and were some of those Nazis shuffled over to NASA?
Well, absolutely. I mean, Werner von Braun. I mean, you got to start with the sort of Operation Paperclip, the Vatican Ratlines, the whole connection between the Vatican and Nazi Germany. That's a whole thing. But then you see the evolution of how they pulled a lot of these guys out ostensibly to say, oh, well, they were really brilliant German scientists and we wanted to recruit them to help us in our future war efforts. But a lot of them were installed at NASA. And I think along with that was the ideology of a lot of these, what you could call them secret societies, that, the Thule societies of Germany, which had their origins going well before any kind of Nazi empire. They're into the occult. They're into the sort of Masonic knowledge. That is stuff that I've been looking at for a long time. And you see it all over their symbolism. You see it over their sort of rituals that they do, the way that they, there's many people, individuals that you can track that have connections to various, like the Werner von Brauns and many others. And then you also just look at the idea that there is this obsession with going to these places and then showing the public only one perspective of it, and then censoring anybody else that wants to come in with a different viewpoint. And, I kind of went, well, that means that maybe they're hiding something from us. So what was their interest in these places? And then why are they hiding all the story from us? Why are we missing reels of footage? Why is there so many questions still unanswered? And that's because I believe that a lot of what NASA is it was founded to be a branch of the military industrial complex, essentially, where they could keep this kind of information to themselves and only tell the public what they feel the public needs to know, and then block the public from knowing what they know, because that gives them a distinct advantage. That's kind of a nutshell. But yeah, there's definitely I guess a dark side to NASA that a lot of people maybe aren't aware of. And that doesn't mean everybody working for NASA is part of some big gigantic conspiracy. I think it's compartmentalized, just like every military structure is, where you're on a need to know basis. And then we've got many hours of whistleblower testimony of people coming out and sharing some rather interesting stories. And so when you chase it all down and you put all the puzzle pieces on the table, you start to ask yourself, can we trust blindly these types of organizations and what they're telling us? Does that mean they're lying about everything? No, I wouldn't go that far. There are people that are just like 100% of everything NASA is telling you and showing you is all CGI and it's all lies. I'm not in that camp. I definitely believe, though, that they are not showing you the full story at the top. And because it's compartmentalized, it's hard for the full story to come out. And that's why you got to go to the maverick scholars and authors and some of these renegades that are trying to tell you the other side of the story. Whether it's all right or not is to be seen. But I find it interesting that when you put it all on the table, a very, very interesting picture emerges that a lot of people aren't aware of.
You touched on something there, and you used terminology that lay people may not be familiar with. I think it's a fascinating subject that perhaps we could just expand on that before we go back to Mars.
Sure.
The role of the Vatican in the exportation of Nazis to the CIA and NASA. There was a route, wasn't there? And there was a system in place.
Absolutely. I've got a little book here. Actually, my wife got it for me for Christmas. It's by an anonymous author who just goes by Maury. It's called The Vatican Ratline. You could read it in like an hour. And it's just to sketch over, and there's many other great works I could recommend forever on this subject about how there was a connection between the Catholic Church, the Roman Catholic Church, as enshrined in the Vatican, and the Nazis. It was actually funded and built. You could even see the direct connections to the symbolism alone coming out of these iron crosses and the eagles and everything. It's all Roman symbolism, and there are a lot of people that believe that the Nazi Empire was essentially an extension of the Catholic Church, the Roman Church, and there's many different intricacies to get into there, but there is a connection. And I think there's a connection to the Vatican and its history, being that the Vatican City, first of all, is a city state. So it's a state within a state. It has its own police, which are Swiss, which is interesting. It's got its own, it's like in the city of London, the Square Mile in London. It's another city state. And what is the most prominent symbol in the Vatican Square? St. Peter's Square. Well, it's the obelisk from Egypt, as is, you'll see these obelisks in the city of London. You'll see them in Washington, D.C. So what's this obsession with ancient Egyptian symbolism in those three major city centers? And when you start with the symbols and then you look into the rites and rituals and you get into the history of these different orders, these chivalric and equestrian orders, the Opus Dei, the P2 lodges, all of these different orders that are housed in Vatican City, you start to see connections in the way they think and the way you would see a lot of these Nazi ideologies being written down in their time. And you also, I show in chapter 6 of Cult of the Medics, I do a section called The Deep Church, which was coined from Archbishop Vigano, who came out as a whistleblower, one of many from the Vatican, to basically talk about the fact that just as there's a deep state in politics, there's also a deep church in these religious centers, and they have a very insidious agenda, and they've been seeking world control since the days of Rome, and they don't ever want to give that up. So the Nazi Empire was an extension of that project, and when that sort of failed, they deviated to a much more subtle approach, which is the approach that we're seeing them use now with all this great reset and all this kind of stuff. And so I think there's a connection to all of it, and I think all roads lead to Rome in the end. And the final statement I'll make is that it's very interesting to me that Rome, the Vatican City, is built on top of ancient Mithraic temples going into the cults of Mithras that are ancient Roman cults. And that'll open up a whole can of worms. And when you find out that one of the satellite organizations that I believe was funded by Rome, called the Club of Rome, which is basically some think tank that basically dreamt up the whole idea that there's too many humans on the planet and we have to start depopulation and they're going to cause the climate to melt down, etc. That cult is run by Mithraic cultists. And I have that actually directly from Dr. David Martin, who I'm going to be having on my show, because he was invited to be recruited by the Club of Rome. and he found out that they were basically an old Mithraic cult, which confirmed all the research I had been doing. So there's connections everywhere, Sean. I could talk to you endlessly about it, but we're going to roll it out in these different podcast series and these different documentaries.
Yeah, that's one of the viewers just Nosferatu. This is fascinating. I was thinking that just as you posted that comment, I'm getting goosebumps listening to all of this. The research that's been done here is phenomenal, and I think it was in a David I book that I saw the pictures of the pyramids on Mars, and I went to watch his talk that he did at Wembley, which was a multi-hour talk. He may have posted them up there as well. And I found it quite mind-blowing that these structures did exist, and I'm still perplexed to this day as to the explanation of them. All right, so in the points here, then we've got a connection between Mars, the story of ancient Atlantis, and possibly even humanity's origins. What is the story of ancient Atlantis?
Well, that's another subject. That's a big minefield, but you can get
Is
into, the Atlantis. Oh my God. Most of the times people are going to laugh you out of the room, which is interesting because there are many ancient recordings coming from different Greek historians. Even Plato talked about it in his conversations with Solon. You can get into Herodotus having some references to it. You can, and also remember, Atlantis wasn't called Atlantis by everybody. It would have had different names based on the place that you were in. But it's funny how you get into all these myths and legends, that are very similar in the way they describe basically a lost chapter of human history. And it's like history begins with Genesis or history begins with Darwin, and that's the end of the story. Well, I beg to differ. I think they're both missing the major point, which is that there's a whole missing chapter of human history, and that we call that subject, the subject of Atlantis, because we're looking at a civilization that was lost, that wasn't just located, in the Azores of Portugal or wherever, or on the Atlantic Ocean somewhere and sank. It was actually an empire, similar to Egypt, similar to Rome. It expanded all over the planet. And then the myths and legends tell you that this great civilization that was highly advanced was destroyed in some kind of war or cataclysm. So the scholars all differ on whether they think it was some kind of war of some kind that wiped everybody out, or they were tinkering with some kind of new technology or something. Or you could just go with, nope, a comet hit the Earth and messed the whole thing up. The whole thing sank. And then this is why on Earth, we see these structures all over, whether you're going to Pumapunku, whether you're going to Bolivia, whether you're going to Egypt, whether you're going to Adams Calendar in South Africa, or Ireland and Britain, all over Britain, all these different megalithic cyclopean ruins that are all aligned astronomically and have all these mysterious elements to them, that there's a connection to this lost civilization. And that is the remnants of that civilization, that Egypt, the Egyptians themselves, in this theory, didn't build the Giza Plateau. They inherited that area and built around it. And you can even see a lot of the pyramids and the structures they built are fading with time. Yet there the pyramid stands, there the Sphinx stands, just in your face. And it just gets deeper than that. So the question would be, did we lose a chapter of history where humanity had risen up at a high level of development, civilization, technology, and knowledge, and then something happened to destroy that? And we've been building back ever since. And our history books and our religious texts start after the cataclysm, after the loss of this civilization. And so then our question in this series is, well, I mean, come on, guys. Do you really think we're alone in the universe? I mean, just think about that for a second. And if humanity wasn't only seeded on Earth, could it be that we have a history, or at least a faction of living beings had a history on planets like Mars or some of these other planets, possibly even other solar systems and galaxies? And could there have been an ancient, like the story of Atlantis, could some of that also be dealing with something going on off planet, not just on Earth? And could some of the descendants that we're looking at in these bloodlines and these secret societies, could they actually be people that fled from cometary destruction on these other planets or even on our own? And that's why we're dealing with this underground secret order, secret society stuff, is that they just wanted to maintain control of the knowledge and not let all the surface dwellers get access to it, so that they could maintain power over the planet and the resources. And so there's some interesting questions there, man. We open up lots of boxes with that one, but I think there's a missing chapter of history. I think it's immortalized in stories like even Lord of the Rings. You can even look into different sections of the Bible and other ancient scriptures for hints at it. And then to all the scientists that go, oh, that's all hogwash, it's all just mythology. Well, then we start getting into the archaeology and the suppression of science by the Smithsonian Institutes and whatnot. The fact that I tell people every day, hey, if you think your news is fake, we've all been learning about how fake our news is lately. Oh, how bad do you think your history departments are, you know?
Yeah, I think that is most possible because if you ponder infinite time, what you described there, the resetting and the rebuilding, it's probably happened over and over and over and over again. And perhaps the Atlantis is just the one we've got some slight traces left of.
I like that. I like that view. Actually, if you got on somebody like Michael Cremo, you should get him on. He'll blow your mind with telling you, look, we've got all kinds of stuff showing human evidence on the planet going back millions of years. So everything we've been told about, humans being just 100, 200,000 years, he would tell you there's evidence to the contrary, and they're suppressing that evidence. And there's been many scholars to come out with those types of ideas. So what you're saying is it's almost like a yuga cycle, where instead of a linear point of time of start and end, Genesis, Revelation, it's a cycle that we keep repeating because we're actually not just part of an Earth cycle. We're involved in a galactic cycle that is far bigger than I think we can even imagine. And so here we are just looking around and seeing little remnants of leftovers of the evidence of that, which is why it's hard to conclusively show. But the evidence enough is there to say, if even one of these points is true, all your history books need to be rewritten.
So I know you've touched on this next question, but perhaps you could expand on it a bit more. Does Mars hold evidence of ancient cataclysm in our solar system that may explain the numerous cataclysmic references in Earth's mythological and geological records?
You're such an eloquent reader, Sean. Well done. That was awesome. I always point people to get into the subject. You got to go with one of the great scientific heretics, Immanuel Velikovsky, who was banished from the kingdom of science for his heresy against the Newtonian physics. And he basically came up with the idea that, yep, there was massive cataclysm in our solar system. He believes that it had to do with, it was Venus or a moon of Venus or something that basically caused a total disruption in the order of our solar system, which is why you have accounts from ancient mythologies and ancient peoples. There was even a time they would talk about a time before the moon. What are ancient legends talking about? A time before the moon could be nothing, but it could be everything. And then even the idea that Saturn would have been in a different position at a different time. They talk about this idea of a second sun. But Velikovsky himself gets into specifically just his theory that massive destruction took place in our solar system that affected all the planets, the order of the planets. You see massive scrape lines all across Mars and other planets. Look at the moon; it's pockmarked, as if it's been just hit nonstop by all kinds of different meteors and asteroids. And then the question is, did that cataclysm that took place in the solar system, is it recorded in the ancient myths? And is that what they're talking about? So not only was there cataclysm on these other planets, but there was also cataclysm as an effect of that on the Earth. And this is where you get the stories of Tiamat and Marduk and the Anunnaki and you bring in all this kind of stuff. It's talking a lot about this ancient cataclysm. So we're looking into it. I'm not saying Velikovsky was right about everything, but he was right about a lot of things. And it was horrible what the scientific establishment did to him to completely suppress the man, slander the man. Even to this day, they just scoff when you bring up his name. Yet you look and you go, yeah, but he predicted a lot of things that ended up being true. And what a great place to start. And I admired the man for having the sand to start his first book, Worlds in Collision, talking about the myths and legends, because all the other scientists just throw that in the dustbin. They don't trust it. Whereas he said, well, what if we bring it in and look at the current astronomy and the science we have? What picture does that form? So that gets into the nuts and bolts of that question of, was there an advanced civilization on Mars? Was there catastrophe? I think that there's a lot of evidence that shows that there was. I think that's why you're seeing NASA coming out now saying, oh, we found little bits of water on Mars and we find water on the moon. And we see a little, maybe microbial life is there. And there's even the theory of panspermia that's coming out of science now, where they look at it as the elements of life itself may have come from Mars. And they look at it like microbial life and all that. But I take it even more literally and go, well, let's just zoom out and ask some big questions. If we're not alone in the universe, or humanity on Earth isn't the only place where living beings are, then what does that do to our whole understanding of history and the nature of the universe that we live in? And I love these kind of questions, Sean, because whether we get to the answers or not, it's the question that drives you to explore the mystery. And that's the most important thing. Is I'm here to tell people, if anything else, you don't have to believe all the stuff I'm talking about, but just if anything else, don't fall for the old trick that says there is no mystery. Come only to us for the answers. Come only to NASA. Come only to the government. Come only to, no matter what it is, don't follow your own curiosity and think for yourself. And don't go listen to those who are the heretics of our own cults. You only listen to us because we are the authority on truth. And as Gerald Massey said, they must find it difficult, those who hold themselves as the authority on truth, rather than putting the truth as the authority. So in my investigation, the truth is the goal. Doesn't mean I always have it, but we're looking at deep mysteries here that are layers upon layers upon layers. And if any of these investigations turn out some answers, we might get some clarification finally on our origins, on where we came from. Because, Sean, I think one of the biggest issues we're dealing with right now in our world is that humans are suffering from historic amnesia. We don't know, it hasn't been settled completely as to our origins. There's been the debates between creationism and evolution and all this forever. Well, what if there's a missing component to both of those arguments that would answer and finally settle it once and for all for the human race? This is our history. This is where we came from. This is who you are. And if we get access to that, would that help correct a lot of our the weird things we all suffer from? And will we have more clarity on where we are so that we can finally think about a positive direction that we could go in the future?
Until attention spans expand beyond the length of a TikTok is the hope. But just touching on what you said there, then. So we're only used to what we experience in our own lifetimes, and we've seen with the pandemic how destabilizing that has been for people who have never experienced anything like that before in their lives. So have you ruminated on the possibility of a new solar system cataclysm and what that could mean for humanity?
Well, I've definitely ruminated on it. It seems like no matter how long I've been doing this research, every year there's some people coming out saying, "Oh my God, the solar flare is going to hit, the world's going to end. There's going to be another meteor is going to hit. There's another asteroid that's going to go by the planet. And it's going to tow us into another dimension or something." There's always been this stuff, and I don't write it off as a possibility because here we are with evidence of it happening in the past. So yeah, there's always that possibility, but I just tell people, in order for us to be able to crack that, we need all the evidence on the table. And if the people who are in power have been suppressing the true story of our history and many of these elements, then we're kind of in the dark and we're not going to know how to deal with something like that if it happens again. Another interesting little point to bring up real quick as I'm thinking about it, about ancient cataclysm, is this theory might also explain why all over the planet, starting in places like Derinkuyu, Turkey, and many others, there are deep, deep, deep caverns that have been dug into just sheer mountainous rock of these underground cities and underground catacombs and underground refuge. And you just start to wonder if ancient man had been experiencing these different cataclysms and had found a way to get into a place within the earth to be able to hide out from the storm that was happening on the surface. And it just kind of makes you think about these modern preppers. Maybe they have a genetic memory or something, and they're just sitting there going, guys, we better be prepared. And while I'm not a doom and gloomer at all, I think our future is bright. I think as long as we are able to discover the truth, then we're on the right track. That if you're prepared, then you don't have to have that fear of, oh, what if? You can be prepared for anything, but then strive forward and keep trying to find out, what the truth is in all these different areas.
Absolutely mind-blowing, David. Can't thank you enough. There's been a surge in the chat towards the end of the show here, revolving around what you've been saying this evening, and we would love if you and Josh Reed could come back on. Do you want to tell the viewers then where they can find your podcast series?
Absolutely. Yeah, I can definitely get in touch with Josh and come back on. Yeah, they can check it out at dwtruthwarrior.com. Just my initials, David Whitehead. So dwtruthwarrior.com. It's got the links to where you can find my streams, where I'm hidden in the dark hallways of the internet now. And then if you want access to my free documentary series, that is cultofthemedics.com. And then I must mention, for the deep analysis of these ancient occult subjects in psychology and philosophy and world history, go check out my premium show with the great Michael Tessarian at unslaved.com. It's a premium show. It's about a cup of coffee a month, but it is a treasure trove of knowledge and information that you literally can't get anywhere else.
All right, huge thanks, brother. You have a good rest of your day. Cheers.
Thanks, mate. Thanks, everybody. Cheers.
Take care. Bye.